I just hope that we see people continue to get curious and explore and try things. And some of them are going to work and some of them are not going to work. But if we're always waiting for someone else to move first, we're going to remain stuck in this kind of indecision along with our clients. And I don't think we have to go back to 2019. I think there's a lot of great forward movement that we could kind of make a better world.
Welcome to Barriers to Entry, the podcast where every episode we get into it with the leaders, the designers, the early adopters, and the influencers who are driving innovation in the architecture and design industry. It's the metaverse, it's AI, it's blockchain, and it's all happening here. I'm Bobby Bonet, an executive vice president at Sandow Design Group. And as always, I'm joined by Digby co-founders Andrew Lane and Tessa Bain. Welcome to the last episode of 2023, Andrew and Tess.
Hard to believe.
Sounds so final and ominous.
Well, I didn't say the last episode ever. It's just the last episode of 2023. We're turning the page. We're going to move forward to 2024 soon. But first, one more episode in 2023.
Bobby, have you worked on any New Year's plans yet?
Oh, that's right. We have to start thinking about our resolutions.
Or just things to do when you count down before the New Year's. Like that's always a whole separate.
When you have young kids, you do a Loser's New Year, which is when you tell the kids at 6 o'clock it's New Year and you play a countdown starting at 5:59 and they all count down and then you try to get all the kids to go to bed by 6:30.
I don't think I've ever heard of anyone call it Loser New Year.
Well, that's what it is.
You just made it up.
Can't you just do like the New Year's celebration from like London, England or something like that? Doesn't that?
No, but the kids just want to watch Kids Bop. So you put on a Kids Bop YouTube video and the countdown starts. And then that's Loser's New Year. Tess, welcome. If you'd like to join, we'll be starting on December 31st at around 5 p.m.
That sounds exciting. That's exciting. Well, and then the resolutions come. Once the
resolutions right after that.
Okay. And hopefully those aren't loser resolutions.
Well, I don't know if we ever got your resolution this year, Andrew. So I will be waiting with bated breath to hear about what your 2024 New Year's resolution is. That's for sure.
For the next recording, I'll be ready to go.
That'd be nice.
I'll be ready to go.
We'd appreciate that.
Speaking of ready to go, we actually have a guest who's never not ready for a conversation about, what's to come. But I think we're going to do a little look back and look forward. And I think it's pretty appropriate that we're rolling into 2023 with a chat from one of our first guests, keeping up with our theme of bringing back repeat guests. This is a woman who has her finger on the pulse of the industry like very few others. And so we're very happy to welcome to the pod today her second guest, which we learned a few weeks ago means you're almost officially a friend of the podcast.
Almost.
Welcome back, Amanda Schneider.
Thank you so much. I think I was one of the first few recordings that you guys did, and now I'm going to be the last in 2023. So that's pretty fun.
Not the last ever, though.
Yeah,
just the last in 2023.
Not the last ever. Why does that keep coming up? No, last of 2023.
Bobby, you're really closing out the year on a morbid note with your.
Let's just stay positive, everyone. Okay.
Well, why don't we go to the positives then? And now that we've got Amanda here and chatting with us, Amanda, why don't we start with a personal positive after we heard all that great personal stuff from Bobby? What was something exciting personally that happened for you in 2023?
I would say one of my highlights of 2023 is we pitched our first article to Forbes and it went viral. So we had over 200,000 views of this article in Forbes featuring ThinkLab, and it performed in the top 0.5%. This was just in October. So that was definitely a 2023 highlight for me.
Once you hit 100,000 views, it's not just your mom and your family looking at it over and over again. Like, you're pretty confident there's other people who are into it. That's amazing.
What was the nature of the article, Amanda?
So it was titled Gen Z and the Great Back to Office Debate Won't End in 2023. And I think it was probably that catchy headline that got a lot of clicks into it. And I think that the resounding theme in that article is really that we get stuck talking about physical space quite often, but people are really the key to physical space coming alive. And so it was some real tangible clues about how to focus on people that came out of our Gen Z research, kind of looking ahead to the newest generation entering our workforce, which actually wants more face time than you would expect, being a digital first generation. And so it really talks about kind of how to activate the best of your people to get them to maybe want to come back in space. And I think some of it is probably counterintuitive, not what you would think in terms of how to get them there.
Well, there was a contention that Gen Zers are just boomers in disguise, right? I think that was one of the underlying themes of the article.
It was, yeah. There's another article we reference often called The Boomerification of Gen Z. That Gen Z is actually more closely aligned with the mindset of boomers than their predecessor.
Hopefully none of the Gen Zers have tuned out of the podcast after hearing that.
I think it's a cool point though, and I know this is something that you saw in your research this year, Amanda, and it's certainly something that's just traced the conversations that we've had on the podcast and in our business and in the world as well. This idea that we are in an era of intense digitization, seeing a real swing back towards the in-person and the personal and the physical. It makes sense, but it's fascinating to really see it play out when we're getting more automation and convenience than ever before. We kind of just want to talk to people again.
And I think it's a real caution to our world right now. I think hybrid work is a great thing. I've built my company on a fully remote model. However, I think we have to be really careful in this era of hybrid work that we don't lose that connection human to human with all these great digital tools, because I think that's going to have, more negative effects than good.
Going back to Gen Z just for a second, I know, Amanda, you've just published recently, ThinkLab revisited 10 bold predictions that y'all made at the start of 2023. And one of those bold predictions was, I'm just going to read the headline, shifting from generational stereotypes to Gen Z as prototypes. Is that a prediction that you still feel holds up heading into 2024? And how do you feel about like kind of the dichotomy between treating Gen Z as prototypes and the fact that it feels as though we're constantly trying to stereotype Gen Zers in predicting their behaviors, predicting whether they want to go back to the office, trying to guess, what their specification habits may be. I'd love your take on that.
Absolutely. I think it's a mindset shift that we're all struggling to make. I think everyone would agree. And I think I'm talking to a group of millennials here, so you guys can probably nod feverishly here, that we didn't do the millennials any favors when we talked about all of you as a generation, because I think we stereotyped. I think that the approach of a lot of generational research at that time was really kind of categorizing, quote unquote, what they want. And the mindset around that research was really empowering leaders, theoretically, of older generations to understand, quote unquote, them. And I think that's a real shift that I've seen. We've spent the last year studying Gen Z, is instead of kind of using it to understand them, one of the ways that we looked at this generational research was Gen Z as prototypes to benefit all generations. So instead of just looking at Gen Z, for example, all of the survey and quantitative data that we had compares all generations to look for some of those trend lines by generation to look at what's shifting. And that's actually where this boomerification of Gen Z, something that we're calling the boomerang effect, comes from, because we actually saw millennials were the most extreme, and Gen Z is kind of starting to align more with Gen X or boomers, often cases in their preferences, which has a lot of clues for us. And I think this idea of Gen Z as prototypes, theoretically, they're the most extreme. I think that's where we went into this research thinking that Gen Z was going to be the most extreme. But the reality is things are just changing so fast that if we look at kind of the newest entrants to our workforce, we can kind of understand their mind shifts and their mindsets and the way that that's happening. And by, instead of stereotyping them, inviting them into that conversation, I think it really helps benefit not only how we treat them per se, but also how we kind of learn about what might be beneficial for all generations as we look at kind of a real tumultuous moment in time that we're in as a society.
Side note, is there someone on the team that's getting credit for that boomerang pun?
It's probably Allison Roon, who is our word genius. So we'll go ahead and give Allie a shout out. Her job title is unicorn because she's exceptional.
I'm just picturing like a 65-year-old Australian man as like the icon for that.
We'll work on that icon. We'll get right on that.
Also, just to point out too, just have to slide this in there. Andrew's actually an elder millennial. If we're getting really accurate.
Okay. Now we're making classes of millennials. I like it.
Yeah.
I'm a cusp. I'm on the cusp.
You're on the cusp.
Yeah.
We wanted to have you on today and make sure that we really got your take on looking back at 2023 and sort of identifying some of, like, through the lens of technology and specific to the design industry, some of the things that you thought that maybe moved a little bit faster. Anything that kind of surprised you in 2023?
I think the first one, one of our TED Bold predictions, number 10, was actually the shift from Web 2 to Web 3. And we were talking at that time a lot about metaverse when we originally made these predictions. And I would say that metaverse conversation, as you guys know all too well, is maybe fading a little bit to where it started at the beginning of the year. But the one that, as you also know, that has happened much more quickly is around AI. And I feel like this kind of fear and hesitation to curiosity cycle happened much faster with AI than any of the other, let's call them technological innovations of the past. I think we are seeing people move from skeptical to testing much, much quicker than I expected. So that's probably the first one that comes to mind.
Do you see a difference from an embracing or testing AI standpoint between design firms and manufacturers? Like, is there a group that's moving faster than the other?
I think there's outliers in each of the different constituents in our industry. And I would throw like commercial real estate in that as well. As you know, like JLL just launched, they're kind of training their first model. So they've definitely jumped in probably in a bigger way than I've heard of any manufacturers or design firms jumping in. I would say across the manufacturer and design firm spectrum, people seem most comfortable using things like ChatGPT and using it for marketing speak, things that aren't kind of dealing directly with their services that they're selling or competing directly. Although we've seen definitely some design firms working with parametric design that we've kind of profiled in some stories that we've done at ThinkLab. We've kind of gone and participated in some events talking about that as well. There's been some early adopters and definitely some laggards. I attend a lot of industry events, and a lot of the speakers, even that I've heard recently in talking about AI, still seem to be very, very focused on kind of the 101. I don't think that most audiences have gotten to even that 201 level just yet.
You know, one thing that we've found really consistently on this thread that's interesting, you know, AI happens at a couple of different levels when you talk about a business, right? Like there's I can go on ChatGPT for free and learn how to make a recipe out of whatever's left over in my fridge, and boom, I'm introduced to AI. And I have a first moment with that. But then, we've also done some talks, have been on some panels and done some work with some larger design firms who were representing, hundreds, if not into thousands of designers, where there is a core team in the center that's doing some really advanced work, but it's still in Pandora's box because of the fact that we are such an IP-driven industry, and because of the fact that, generative AI by nature is looking for IP in order to generate. The firms have taken pretty pragmatic, closeted approaches to what they're doing in this space a lot of the time. So when you get out on the front lines, you may again have that person who's playing around with ChatGPT. But when you look at the firm as a totality, there's actually some pretty advanced work, but it's just it's not part of the full rollout of the process the way you might see it in a smaller firm. Like one of our past podcasts, Hawken and Matthias Holwich have come out with their AI forward approach as a part of their marketing for their firm, but they're 50 people, right? And I think you can move like that and act like that when you've got a founder who's oriented in that way. But when you're 1,500 people just in the design practice, you kind of have to approach these things a little bit differently. So I think it's been interesting to see AI moving fast and slow at the same time in the work that we've come across. And I wonder if that's anything you've bumped up against as well.
Mm-hmm. I like how you say that, moving fast and slow. And I think that we probably as an industry should be cautious. I was just listening to a podcast over the weekend where Trevor Noah interviewed Bill Gates about if he would do it all the same way, knowing now what he knew then. And he was talking about the invention of computers and how we didn't have to, like when computers were invented, we didn't have to think about the malintentions that we do now with tools like AI. So I definitely see this fast and slow, and a lot of these larger organizations kind of trying to turn the Titanic, if you will, which is a little bit, here's another positive reference for Bobby, which is a tough thing to kind of shift mindsets. But I think, it's probably a smart thing that we're all moving forward with cautious optimism, but emphasis being on that cautious because there's still a lot that we don't know.
Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, you just answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you, more scheduling flexibility, and at a more affordable price. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/BTE. That's betterhelp.com/BTE.
So I have another quick thought.
Yeah, definitely.
In our first hackathon that we did back in 2020, our speaker was a man named Daniel Susskind, who's fascinating and really good looking and fun to listen to, by the way, because he's got a beautiful accent. But
It always helps.
yeah, always helps. But he wrote a book called The Future of the Professions that really talked about how technology is going to shift these professions like architecture, like doctors, like lawyers that have always been, highly regulated and licensed. And I actually, it's on my list of things to do to go back and listen to that or reread his book, because I think with AI, it's really kind of bringing to light a lot of the things that he talked about, how technology is really going to have to reframe how we think of some of these professional practices.
Yeah, we had a presentation this morning in a sales meeting regarding architecture firms, and they're embracing AI. And something I'm just curious to observe is whether there'll be some level of mindset where there's an inevitability at the firm level to embrace AI because of, maybe it's just a little more natural to think about the ways in which AI can kind of help with the design process. And then on the manufacturer side, it'll be a little bit more kicking and screaming just because I feel it's a little bit more disruptive as a manufacturer, just to think about the ways in which, how do I need to integrate AI into my product development cycle? How do I need to think about emerging technologies as it relates to building out a virtual showroom? How am I going to leverage AI and disrupt my marketing organization from an AI tooling perspective? It's one side's very creative in nature. The other side's very technical in nature. I'm way oversimplifying things, but just when you think about that first step to adoption, looking in the fridge and tapping into ChatGPT, stuffing cranberry sauce and turkey.
That's a pretty easy one for ChatGPT, Bobby.
That's a good point. Maybe I don't need ChatGPT for that one, but I feel like the barrier to entry seems a little bit simpler for me as a layman on the architecture side, or approachable for that first step, or maybe even more exciting than if I'm sitting in a manufacturing firm and thinking, how am I going to kind of like reverberate against that?
I would see like ChatGPT and some of the things that those in creative professions might see it as taking away from versus, for me, the industry that we focus on, our main clients are these manufacturers. I've worked in product development. I've worked in sales. I've worked in marketing. I've worked in market research. I've worked in showrooms. And I think that what ChatGPT can do for those audiences is actually less intrusive to the core of probably what they're passionate about and what they got into that side of the industry to do. So I would see it as being easier, but I definitely see both sides of that coin has some of the early adopters and some laggers.
Yeah, the operational side is a really interesting one, but I think that's much more turning the Titanic than, putting in a prompt and getting a few ideas for how you might design a room. So like barriers to entry, great use of words there, Bobby. I don't know where you came up with that turn of phrase from.
Very clever.
But
right?
Yeah.
So what's really interesting about what you said, specifically about regulated and licensed industries, and Andrew touched on a little bit, these bigger firms may be a little bit slower to turn the ship and also executing using these tools in their daily practice, but maybe not advertising it. And I wonder if there's a hesitancy around liability of using technology and how that's not quite sorted out yet, right? There's a few things and hurdles that need to be addressed there in industries that are, carry so much liability and risk. And I see maybe on the manufacturing side, it'd be the barrier to entry, if you will, is a little bit less, meaning that it's a little easier. It's easier to integrate a chatbot assistant into, specification process, or, here's my material library. Can I have AI help my designer kind of sort through based on what they need? Things like that.
Super interesting. Well, and we did, Erica Weinberg on the Think Lab team actually spent some time with an architecture studio in Detroit. I think they're called Inform Studio. That is like very forward using this parametric design and using a lot of technology. They've actually been able to maintain or even raise their fees, but get the work done more profitably. And they were very open with us. We wrote an article about them, so I think I can talk about them. But they're doing some really, forward-thinking things. I think they are a smaller firm. So to Andrew's point, maybe it's a little bit easier to do some of that. But I love hearing these stories about firms that are really kind of out there and doing these innovative things.
It's maybe not less that it's easier to do and it's easier to get the permission in the smaller firm. There's a lot less people you need to convince it's okay.
Yeah.
Which is a big part of it. I put a pin in this before and I wanted to come back to it before we get into our next topic area. But, this idea of coming back to being more human-centered, I think is a big contributor to the point that you'd made earlier about the rise and sustenance of the AI trend versus, the metaverse trend that we saw at the beginning of the year. I used to go and regularly attend the Deloitte Technology and Communications predictions at the beginning of every year. And years back, they were always predicting, like everyone was saying, oh, VR is going to be this year, VR. And, they always said, we don't see VR being this big of an industry. Like it's got about this potential of like blenders, like they were talking about other consumer products that like some people own, but like not everyone has, right? And I think that metaverse is proving itself out to be really similar in that way. But I think that really intrinsically ties into this idea of people going back towards the physical, because what Mark Zuckerberg came out with around a year ago, the thing was, when are we going to go away into our metaverses and not see each other in person anymore? And I just don't think that worked for anybody. I think that technology works really, really well in certain use cases. And when those use cases are connected to in an industry context, now let me get in touch with my rep because I've done this research inside of this virtual showroom. Or, now like let me follow up on with that physical product sample because of the fact that I've narrowed my selection down by being able to really quickly look at and rotate a 3D version of this chair in every fabric swatch that I might be interested in seeing it in. I think that those are the ways that we're now starting to realize the tools can become useful. But it almost has to get over this hangover from the fact that people were almost conditioned to feel as though it took them away from their humanity to need to engage with it. And I just wonder if you've seen that pop up, but it to me reads through in some of the trends that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned Deloitte because Jessica Jenkins on my team was just speaking at the Next Gen Summit out on the East Coast and shared the stage with Deloitte. And one of their big predictions was definitely we're going to be in the metaverse kind of sooner than a lot of other things that we're hearing. So super excited to kind of see where that lands and where we end up with the metaverse. I see a lot of opportunities for our industry in kind of balancing this. But I want to talk about a new study that just came out. So Meredith Campbell on the Think Lab team is going to be presenting, or will have presented by the time this airs, our bold predictions for 2024 and where that's coming. And one of the most fascinating things that she discovered in that process is actually a new study by Gartner. And we've been talking about the phygital journey. If you're not familiar with phygital, it's the physical plus digital and how to kind of create these experiences that blend the two. And we've been referencing a lot of McKinsey data that talks about, especially for our brand partners, this rule of thirds when it comes to selling. So a third face-to-face, breathing the same air, a third self-serve, like fully digital, and a third synchronous but remote. So think of that as Zoom, phone calls, things like that. But what this new Gartner study looks at is actually the blend of self-service, traditional rep-led, and rep-assisted digital commerce. And what they actually found was that it cut buyer regret in half when it was rep-assisted digital commerce. And so the aha from this is really looking at, I think we've looked at digital tools as a way to make our human capital more efficient. But it's actually going to be the opposite, I project, in 2024 and beyond, where our human reps are going to make those digital tools more efficient. And the ideal buying journey is going to be a little bit flipped of maybe where we once thought it was.
Yeah, we love that. And that's a lot of the work we're doing right now is really aligned to that. Is like they're tools, right? And I think that AI as a tool makes really intrinsic sense to people really quickly. And the cost to get engaged in it is much lower. But, these larger tools around these metaverse realities, we've talked a lot about industrial metaverse on this podcast, this idea of purpose-built 3D spatial environments. Like that makes so much sense to what you're saying. So absolutely.
And I also think it's going to be kind of a rebalancing of tech tools for brand building versus tech tools for transaction enhancing. I think, I was at a Cornet luncheon a few weeks ago and I had a rep come up to me and say, oh, I'm doing all the phygital things that you talk about, because he was using HubSpot templates, which was, really about kind of converting those leads to business. And I was like, well, that's not really what we mean by phygital. It's really kind of that whole buying journey. And so that's another thing that Meredith is talking about a lot right now, is really branding are balancing that brand building piece of your digital presence with the transactional piece and converting those leads into business.
So if you're a manufacturer right now and you're looking to invest in 2024, do you invest in people or do you invest in digital tools?
I don't think it can be an either or.
Yeah.
I think you invest in the people that are going to help you figure out the digital tools.
We've had conversations with marketing leaders who have jumped in the deep end and have experimented with tools like virtual showrooms, and they still have a heck of a time getting their own internal staff to experiment and use some of those tools. And I think one of the reasons is that misconception that you just pointed out, Amanda, which is this showroom is going to take my place in the buyer's journey. And no, in fact, it's the rep who's embracing the showroom to have a more elevated discovery experience, that first touch with their potential client, who's going to, at the end of the day, have a more successful territory than the individual who either says, okay, go use the showroom, or says, no, I'm not going to use that virtual showroom. I know we've seen research before from ThinkLab that points to that journey, or maybe the point of discovery, happening first online in an increasing amount. Have you fleshed out at all what that merge journey looks like between digital tools and reps, and kind of where the tool and the person converges?
I love this question. Yes, we sure have. So we have a whole nother study on that is the industry's first ever persona study that looks at decision makers, not only in the architecture and design realm, who we know have 26 times the average recommendation power as spending power, but also across commercial real estate and even end users. So we have 5 different personas that exist, what I say, along a range of phygital eagerness. So ranging from, at one end of the spectrum, what we call the rep first persona, which is pretty self-explanatory, to the other end of the spectrum, the digital first persona. And then there's 3 kind of other personas in the middle. And I think one of the interesting things about that study is we now have a benchmark that we're able to measure year over year, even by audience. And some of the major shifts, so there's 2 that I would consider kind of more traditional approaches for this industry, what we call the rep first and what we call brand first. Those 2 personas make up around 60% of our overall database, I guess, of that. And that hasn't changed. But we have seen a huge shift from rep first personas shifting to about a 10% increase in that brand first persona. So about a 10% decrease in that rep first, 10% increase in that brand first, which says a lot of that shift has actually come from older specifiers, older product selectors. So that says we're seeing that shift to someone who's trusting the brand over that individual rep. We also saw a pretty big increase. Our sustainability first persona doubled, went from 5% to about 9.5%. And they're small but mighty, we like to say. So I think that increase in sustainability says something steady for a data first persona. And we saw a slight decrease in our digital first persona, which was also really interesting. And I think that overall layout really speaks to the rise of the brand and why that's so super important right now too.
Do you think that there's an element? I mean, your typical specifier at this point is younger and more of a digital native. And, you tend to find in that instance that they don't think about digital in the same way that, a 65-year-old Australian man, as an example, might. So, does that make you think a little differently about how you define those personas? Is that something you're watching kind of moving forward to say? Because when you get to a real digital native, the word brand might speak to how fluidly digital that brand comes across their desk as, and how easy they are to interact and transact with. And they see that as strength of brand rather than strength of digital, as an example.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's about, especially for those younger specifiers, brand authenticity. And brand authenticity isn't just a great website. It's making sure that the website, the showroom, the humans they interact with, whether over the phone or in a physical location, all kind of speak the same language and give them that same experience. So I think it's kind of separating some of those terms. The other thing that I'll say is, we have kind of a wide range, which is what makes us, the work that we do, kind of difficult. So when it comes to the design specifier, think of someone who is working at an A&D firm. We're seeing kind of a 2-step specification process. So it is definitely these younger, maybe digital native folks that are pulling the options and then presenting them typically to a more senior, seasoned person within that firm. But as I mentioned, we also have end user decision makers. And these end user decision makers are someone we're diving into in a deep way in 2024. And when we look at that, average B2B decision makers, 65% of them are millennials and Gen Z. when we kind of dissect ThinkLab data for this industry, that is a highly complex industry, our data suggests that I want to say it's only around 36% of them are millennials and Gen Z. So those end user decision makers tend to be much, much more seasoned. And it means we can't just kind of look at what Gen Z wants in a vacuum. We really have to continue to kind of look at this range of spectrums and perspectives and the complexity of the buying cycle in this industry and who's looking for what.
Tess, I mean, you have a ton of experience in that space. How are you seeing all this kind of play out in real time?
It's so fascinating, Amanda, because, working in it every day, we actually are seeing a lot of the same sort of thing where obviously the rep relationship is super important and something that, brings us a lot of success. But no matter even the strength of our relationship, we're starting to see that brands are connecting directly with the specifiers. And so oftentimes what will happen is like the specifiers and the dealers are going to go straight to that vendor, to the manufacturer partner. And it sort of loops itself back in a circle of sort of how they found the product to how they go to purchase the product. And then, of course, how the decision goes from there. So we're definitely seeing that too. And I wonder if it's just, a combination of all the things of the digital presence that they have. To your point, it was a strong brand is an element of many things. And the access that specifiers have to self-service tools as well, if that's kind of strengthening the story.
I think on that, it's just, it's a real shift. This industry has been built upon the sales rep having all the control and a lot of control and controlling that relationship and controlling that experience. And as we talk about digitizing, that's often giving up control and putting all your information into a CRM system and, hoping that this new marketing tool that's untested that you don't really understand is going to actually do the job for you. And, when we speak to sales teams, we often survey them. And we go across the 5 different personas and we say, which of these is the most important persona for your brand to focus on? And, it's no surprise that like more than 60% typically say, oh, that rep first is the place that we should be focused as a brand, So I think it's a tough time to be a sales rep because we're asking them to join us in uncharted water and trust people who are wading through uncharted waters to kind of figure out what this next normal is going to be like.
And there's a different sense of trust too. That's maybe from when I started in the industry. It used to be that what I was taught was, keep your cards close, keep your contacts close, your relationships close. And now there's this greater sense of transparency and trust where it's, this is all the information I have. We're in this together. Everyone's a partner and kind of approaching projects and specifications that way. And I see that only increasing moving forward, which is a shift for anyone who's been in the industry for a few decades versus anyone that's maybe starting on the sales rep side as a younger professional.
I agree.
Introducing Work From Anywhere, a Hayworth Connect podcast, where we sit down with industry experts to discuss what's new and important in the world of work. We are now kicking off Season 2. In this series, we're focused on organizational culture, how important that is to the way we go forward in a work-from-anywhere ecosystem, and how we design the workplace to best support the most engaged workforce. We're available wherever you find your podcast, and we hope you'll learn along with us.
When we spoke last year, Amanda, we spent some time forecasting or prognosticating about what trade shows might look like in 2023. And so we want to revisit that question and spin that forward and look at 2024 a little bit. You have a cohort of trend spotters that join ThinkLab in taking a look at what's happening at NeoCon each year. I'm wondering what you're looking ahead. Maybe you in conversation with the trend spotters might change or might evolve. Looking at the big trade shows in 2024, what predictions you might have?
I could go predictions, but I guess one of the most interesting things that we looked at in some of our research this year, we did Trend Spotters, which was kind of our public face looking at the trends, and they came up with top 10 trends that they saw, for example, at NeoCon. We're going to look at doing more of those next year. We also did our Secret Shoppers, which is a little more behind the scenes. People can kind of choose to be a part of that program where we, like it sounds, we secret shop their showroom. And as my team was kind of digesting all of that, one of my favorite pieces from this year was actually what they didn't see. So I think we often look at trends, what we saw, what was everywhere. But one of my favorite questions that we asked both of those groups this year is, what didn't you see that you kind of wish that you did? So one of them was kind of this idea of experience over product. it's really, I think we tend to be a product focused industry. Look at how many, I think I talked about this on the last podcast too, but like, look at how many product awards we have, but we don't have awards over process. And as we're diving into kind of this end user and what's changing with the B2B decision making process, one of our shifts that we're seeing is what was once features and benefits or product focused is now unique business value. And how do you kind of pitch what your company does unlike any other? Because I think, especially as we look at Gen Z, their expectations for authenticity and being true and authentic. If they walk into your showroom and you're like, this is truly the most unique chair that you've ever seen, or the most unique XYZ that you've ever seen, whatever the gadget is. And then they walk into the next showroom and that guy is saying the same thing. It's a negative experience for them all around. So as we shift to kind of unique business value, what are you providing to them? How are you making that come alive in a really, really authentic way in your showroom? I think that's a huge opportunity for our industry. And we had a lot of our folks, especially, around specific shows that kind of said, we come here looking at product. We don't expect experience or really to understand trends or to get answers to these bigger questions. And I think that's a problem for our industry, especially in this era that we're in, kind of this great back to office debate and where we're going to head with the balance of people and technology and physical space and virtual. I think our industry should be leading in that. And it's going to mean kind of thinking bigger outside of just product.
So how do you kind of balance that for a big trade show where you might have 6 different audiences you're trying to please and 3 of those audiences isn't interested in that sort of big statement?
I mean, I think something could be experiential around product as well. I think it's really a matter of how do you stand out and how do you reframe it from what my product is about or what my brand is about to what I do for you. And to me, it's that reframing that makes it so meaningful and helps you to stand out. And I think that experiential piece, like it doesn't mean you have to be like in immersive VR goggles or a fully technological experience. I think it's really about how you leverage maybe the physical and digital to make that story authentically come to life and reframe for whoever it is that is experiencing your space, if that makes sense.
I think the other really interesting opportunity, and this goes back to this idea of like purpose-built digital product, right, is that you can kind of weave all these things together and, to Bobby's point, allow people to kind of choose their own path, right? When you take the power of a physical experience, which is the merchandise mart, and you weave that together with some of the digital tech that's really starting to emerge. Like, I'm really interested for next year in how many people really try and crack that nut, and say, you think about the amount of data that's available about the product in the back end. Why isn't that more transparently available? Like, that's a lot of that unique business value that you're talking about. Are you seeing people trying to bring this to the forefront more? Like, Tess and I have been in a lot of conversations lately about quick ship. People love the idea of just being able to understand what's in stock and get it immediately. But there's obviously a lot of logistics that need to happen behind the scenes of that. In order to enable that, you're actually sitting on a lot of data that enables a number of other complementary experiences that we're just not seeing show up in the context of a trade show, at least not broadly.
Yeah, and I think it's just really about kind of what you want to be remembered for. And it could be your quick ship. It could be, I think you could create experiences all around that. I think you could create experiences around product. I'll use as an example, the Turf showroom.
Was amazing.
Was obviously the darling of NeoCon. And, the experiential thing is you're in this loud hallway. It was just like absolutely echoey out there and you almost couldn't hear. And then you walked into the space and the first one was an obvious removal of one layer of noise. And then it got progressively quieter with each of the vignettes you kind of moved through and they started to add back in white noise elements and smell elements. There was a cocktail room that you could taste.
Smell elements, by the way.
Smellements. I like it.
Did you just coin that, Bobby?
I did. We can let Allie know about that one.
Wow.
Nice. Okay. We'll tell Allie. But I think that's a great example of something that to me is experiential, but really was technology devoid almost, other than that sound machine that was in there. Do you have a cute name for a sound machine?
I would call it the Miami Sound Machine. Just
there we go.
Bring home my cusp millennial.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
I missed that reference.
But I think there's ways to kind of bring these experiences to life. And I think that as we talk about this shift from features and benefits to unique business value, whether it's, business value that they're bringing quiet to your space, or whether it's business value of a quick ship and how you're remembered from this show for that. I think there's lots and lots of ways you can create something that's experiential. Maybe it involves brand. Maybe it involves technology, but it doesn't have to. I think it's really about what you want to be remembered for and how you reframe that experience to the user's journey that's coming through your space.
Producer Rob just shared a photo of the Miami Sound Machine.
Nice.
Tess and I are taking that in. Amanda, we've put you through the ringer in terms of data and analysis and a little bit of forecasting and predicting. But I'm curious, like, what do you want from 2024, from the industry, from an advancement standpoint, I know we talked about human-centric design and human-centric experiences, but if you were to pick something to happen next year, or whether it's manufacturers or design firms or just the industry writ large, to focus on something next year, what would that thing be for you?
I guess I would challenge the industry to really get curious and start to experiment. As we turn our focus to 2024, we are starting to look at client decision-making, customer decision-making, and how that happens. What is the future of customer decision-making? How has the last few years kind of changed that? And one of the things we're looking at is this decision indecision. I think especially in the corporate sector, which by our data is down 19% since the onset of the pandemic and is not projected to recover very quickly. If you read a lot of those projections, it's going to mean that our industry has to get ready to do business a little bit differently as people are, looking to weather this storm in other vertical markets, from hospitality to healthcare to life sciences to multi-use to multifamily to redevelopment and really repurposing some of these empty office spaces downtown. I think we're going to have to kind of look at old problems with fresh eyes and really try to figure out where to go. So if I had to say my wish for 2024 is that people would move, I think that we tend to want to be fast followers. We actually did a study where we asked, are you an early adopter, a fast follower, or a traditionalist? And more than 2/3 were fast followers and traditionalists in this industry that we know is super creative and could be early adopters. So I just hope that we see people kind of continue to get curious and explore and try things. And some of them are going to work and some of them are not going to work. But if we're always waiting for someone else to move first, we're going to remain stuck in this kind of indecision along with our clients. And I think there's I don't think we have to go back to 2019. I think there's a lot of great forward movement that we could kind of make a better world.
That's a really nice way to wrap up the year. A lot more positive than you had been about the end of the year, Bobby.
Can't catch a break.
Yeah, yes. Thank you, Amanda. Amanda, the floor is yours. What do you have going on? What would you like to plug that either you're working on or that ThinkLab has coming to market?
Yeah, I would definitely check out our 2024 bold predictions. So that should be up on the website by the time this airs. So I would check that out. I would also feel free to reach out to learn more about our future of customer decision making design hackathon. I think that, that's going to be fascinating. Each one of these, we kind of go into the world of unknown and kind of tackle a big, hairy problem. And we'd love to have your listeners kind of join us for that journey and figure out where that's going to go.
Amanda, that was so awesome. Thank you so much for reflecting on 2023 with us and looking forward to 2024. Before we wrap up today, though, we wanted to ask you if you had, and we've asked you this already once before.
This is a funny question for Amanda, to be fair. Does Amanda have resources? But
yeah, let's shift the question a little bit. Obviously, you've got a lot of resources for us, but do you have any advice? And of course, you can share some resources for our listeners that are looking to just get started in this space or even understand a little bit more of what we talked about today.
Yeah, I would say definitely keep listening to this podcast. Of course, if you're learning about technology and that's your area of interest, I would definitely follow along with that. If you're interested in following ThinkLab to get more about kind of what we're looking at as the future, I would definitely follow our podcast, Design Nerds Anonymous. We officially made the top 5% of podcasts in 2023.
Congrats.
So super exciting. And you could also just follow us on LinkedIn or Instagram. I'm a big LinkedIner. So, always posting, interesting things that I come across, podcasts that I'm listening to there on my early morning run. So would love to stay connected with any of your listeners as well.
Amazing.
And Amanda, are you on coffee or off coffee? What's the latest because our listeners are wanting?
I am off coffee. So tea only, no
That's
caffeine
amazing.
for me right now.
I just picked up a subscription to something called Mud Water that I'm going to try.
Have you tasted it yet, though?
I'm going to taste actually maybe right after this. We'll see. It's meant to be a mid-afternoon pick-me-up. No caffeine. We'll see.
Okay. Report back. I want to hear how that goes.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Producer Rob, Miami Sound Machine, Miami White Noise Machine, super fan. What did you learn today, or what do you have to share with the listeners?
Well, I just think it's very interesting that, like, when you're approaching AI now, like, so many people still have this, like, thing ingrained in their head, like Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse or whatever, but how you actually approach the user and how that's evolved is really eye-opening to me in a way that like I feel like has been stagnant in the podcasting world or like the world I live in. And so to see that there's like not only age group demographics, user demographics, and just how AI can be evolved to work with people rather than like forced on people was really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think it's so flexible, and people are already so used to Google that this is just like a step up and an understanding that I think the biggest thing that you find people learning is I can actually have a conversation with my search query now, which can be game changing for some people. Like Bobby figuring out what to do with all those turkey and stuffing after his Thanksgiving dinner. Make a turkey sandwich, Bobby.
I was overwhelmed. Too many leftovers.
Yeah.
Make a turkey sandwich. Rob, thanks for jumping in, and totally agree.
Sure.
And Amanda, thank you again so much for joining us. Rob, I'm actually going to thank you again because this is the part of the show where we thank the Barriers to Entry production team, including yourself, as well as everyone else back at the Studio by Sandow. If you did not know, Barriers to Entry, as well as Design Nerds Anonymous, are a part of the Surround Podcast Network. Make sure you go to surroundpodcast.com, podcast with an S. You can follow us. You can follow Amanda. You can follow a whole bunch of other great podcasts. But the biggest thing is to have a very happy non-loser, right, Bobby? New Year's Eve, and see us all back here in 2024 while we continue to break down the barriers to entry.
I heard something that said if you remember the Oregon Trail, you're an elder millennial, and if you do
I
not,
didn't just remember the Oregon Trail. I excelled.
you excelled it.
You lived
Yeah.
it. You lived the Oregon Trail.
I excelled. Yeah.